Yeah. I'm no.
Yeah, you are? Okay. So first, can you just give us a brief about, your name, your occupation?
Yes. Okay. So my name is James Ross. I'm the Legal and Policy Director here at Human Rights Watch. And our legal office works closely with our researchers to ensure that the reporting that Human Rights Watch does, not only are the facts accurate, but with international law. And the international law we look at is both international human rights law, such as found in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also international humanitarian law, which is the laws of war, and concern the use of the use of military force during armed conflicts. We don't try to address the whether using force, going to war, is right or wrong. Instead, we really focus on the conduct of military hostilities. And that way, it puts us in a position to really look at both sides in an armed conflict to make sure they are abiding by the laws of war.
Okay. So just, before we start the questions, because our voices are not going to be on the video, so when we ask you a question, can you just include that in your answer?
Try to include the question.
Yeah?
Try to include
Okay.
that. Right.
So concerning journalists' safety,
Right.
in war zones especially, what can you tell us about that? Like, what does the international law say about that?
Okay. The laws of war, international humanitarian law, provides protections for journalists during armed conflicts. An important precept of the laws of war are that both the parties to a conflict, the warring parties, must discriminate between or differentiate between civilians and combatants, soldiers. Okay? Journalists are civilians, and as a result cannot be subject to attack during an armed conflict. In addition, the newsrooms or broadcasting centers and the like are also presumptively civilian objects, and therefore they also can't be targeted for attack.
Okay, and what does the international law say about when the soldiers attack the journalists when they're holding their cameras and they take out their memory card and take out all their pictures?
Right. Okay. Journalists who are in the field during an armed conflict situation, often are around where fighting is taking place. They are often mixed with soldiers. So one has to be careful. Just because a journalist may be harmed in fighting doesn't necessarily mean that there's an obligation. Journalists, for example, if they are standing around soldiers, that doesn't mean they can be targeted, but they are taking on some measure of risk. And that's important to recognize. Soldiers can take steps in order to for security reasons. However, they would have to be very limited reasons for a specific purpose. So we would certainly be concerned in any instance where, say, a journalist's notes or computers or photographs are confiscated, because that could interfere with the journalist's lawful freedom of expression. Though I don't want to say that could never happen. Okay. There are certain restrictions that journalists have as well. Some of them just dealing with journalistic ethics, or things that can be valid military security concerns. So we would look at any case where that happens very carefully. But it's important that journalists be protected and be allowed to do their work.
What are the actions that journalists can take if they can prove or they have evidence that a country or military attacked them intentionally?
First of all, I'm happy to answer that. Should I say something though about like broadcasting centers and the like? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I'm happy to answer that. There are some issues involving like attacks on like news organizations, not just individual journalists,
definitely.
which I can talk about. But if you're just interested in individual journalists,
We're interested in both, actually.
Okay, so then let me say something about that, and then answer your question. As I noted, news organizations, broadcasting centers, and the like, radio stations, are civilian objects, which means they cannot be attacked under the laws of war.
Mm-hmm.
There would be an exception where such broadcasting centers are being used for military purposes. So if a newsroom, a radio station is giving military orders to forces in the field, they would be involved in military operations and thus be subject to attack. But they are presumptively civilian. So whenever Human Rights Watch learns of an attack, say, on a radio station or the like, we will investigate that. And again, the assumption is that this is an unlawful attack. And the attacking party really needs to be able to explain why it attacked that center and needs to demonstrate that it was in fact a military target. It was being used for military purposes. Otherwise, that attack would be illegal. Some governments in recent years have tried to assert that a radio station that has been broadcasting information that tries to support the morale of the local people is being used for military purposes. But that's wrong. It really, radio stations, can express support for a particular side in a conflict. That doesn't make them a military target. And so such attacks are unlawful.
Okay, what the facilities you can give to the journalists if they are on attack or get harmed?
Okay, I was going to get to that. If someone is unlegally harmed in an armed conflict situation, it's always been a difficult problem in terms of how to provide redress in an armed conflict situation. International humanitarian law, the laws of war, or the Geneva Conventions as they're known, places a requirement on parties to a conflict to investigate allegations of war crimes.
Mm-hmm.
A war crime is a serious violation of the laws of war that is committed with criminal intent. That means it's done deliberately or recklessly. So when there is a serious violation, we and others would examine that and look to see whether a war crime has been committed. And if there are basic allegations, it is up to that state to investigate and to prosecute those responsible. There's a very long history of militaries not investigating abuses by their own forces, which has always made this a difficult issue or a real shortcoming in enforcing the laws of armed conflict. Because of that, governments around the world enacted the Rome Statute, creating the International Criminal Court, which is designed not to handle all cases, but the International Criminal Court will look at war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in circumstances where a government is either unwilling or unable to investigate those kind of abuses that have occurred. So that is one avenue for victims, but it requires that the International Criminal Court take up the armed conflict situation. There are other ways that victims can get redress. We have seen certain circumstances, for example in Afghanistan, where NATO governments have provided compensation to families who have been hurt in the fighting. This has been done without any showing of guilt, without any trial, but it is providing compensation to victims. And there is nothing to prevent governments for providing compensation to individuals who have been harmed in a conflict.
Thank you very much for your time. Sorry, what?
This is a lot. It's the آخر سؤال.
يلا اسأل.
Okay, so this is the final question.
Okay.
Can you provide us with tips to journalists, if not to ensure their
طلع
safety, but perhaps to how to file suits against the people who breached this safety, if it was illegal?
Can you?
People who have been harmed in armed conflict, it historically is difficult as individuals to either or other redress. Sometimes militaries have set up systems to do that. As I noted, NATO has done that in Afghanistan. That has not happened in many circumstances, and the legal avenues are difficult for individuals to obtain compensation. I can't give you a better answer than that because they're really,
Thank you.
it's a historic
So-
problem.